And good afternoon, everyone. We're really privileged today to have the 37th Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Robert Neller, with us. He's going to discuss the future of the Marine Corps. And as many of you already know, General Neller is no stranger to asking hard questions about the future, nor is he a stranger to critiquing his own service. In fact, shortly after taking office as Commandant in late 2015, he published the Marine Corps operating concept, which explicitly stated, quote, "The Marine Corps is not organized, trained, and equipped to meet the demands of the future operating environment," end quote. So then, in an effort to address some deficiencies, he helped oversee the development of a vision for Marine Corps Force 2025, oversaw the creation of Marine Expeditionary Force information groups, the establishment of a cyber MOS, and the development of new naval concepts such as expeditionary advanced base operations. And he even changed the size of the basic element of the Corps, the Rifle Squad. Again, it may be an understatement to note that not all of these changes were accepted with open arms, quite the opposite in some of these cases. So General Neller, thank you for taking the time to join us again at the Future Security Forum to share your thoughts.
Thanks.
So I'd like to jump right into the questions. We'll start 30,000 feet and then get down to the nuts and bolts at ground level. So first, sir, I'd like to jump right into the discussion by asking, in light of the new strategic guidance, the 2018 National Defense Strategy, how will the Marine Corps adapt for a future characterized by great power competition? You've made some headway over the last few years, but what needs to change moving forward?
Well, the strategy is pretty clear for us, and I guess the CNO was here earlier today.
Yes, sir.
For the Naval Force. It tells us, well, the strategy tells you increase lethality and readiness, maintain, build partnerships and alliances, and improve the processes of the Pentagon. And it tells the Naval Force to be able to compete in the contact and blunt zone, tells us who the pacing threat is, and not at the exclusion of other missions, but gives us direction in that. So if you know what you're looking at as a potential adversary, I think we kind of anticipated that.
Sure.
Because the Marine Corps has historically been a Pacific-oriented force, although globally employed around the world. So it gave us an opportunity to look where we were in the implementation of Force 2025, things that we thought were going to be helpful, like the MEF information group and the increased ability to do information operations, in which I include cyber, electronic warfare, and management of the spectrum. And let us look at the other priorities, which is maintain and secure and resilient network, improve our ability to long-range precision fires, be able to do distributed logistics, have protective maneuver, and be able to distribute the force across the battle space. So we're gaming that, we're practicing that, we're rehearsing it. I think we still have some deficiencies, and we're looking at how we've moved along as far as Force 2025. I think there's still some changes and things we have to make. As I get near the end here, you start to think about all the stuff that didn't get done.
Right.
I mean, you get nostalgic on one hand, which is, mildly interesting if you're sitting around having a bourbon. But more importantly, you say, okay, what do we need to do? And so we're having those discussions now. So I'm confident that we'll continue to evolve and adapt this thing. And I think, you're never done. But I think in today's environment, your pace of change, not just for technology, but your organizational structure, has got to go faster. You got to be able to turn faster, and it's not something we do as well as we should.
Sure.
So we'll continue to exercise. I mean, I'll give you an example. So about a month ago, there was an exercise called Pacific Blitz on the West Coast, and it was a naval exercise where, with the 3rd Fleet and 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, they attempted to replicate some of these expeditionary advanced-based ops. They used the naval lift to get ashore, establish a forward arming and refueling point. We had aircraft come in, and we tried to break it down, move it around, use the sea as maneuver space. We tried to use pre-positioned shipping and get people out. But the most interesting thing I think we did, because that's not really anything new, it's just new in what we were trying to achieve by it, was we took both the 3rd Fleet and the 1 MEF staff and created one staff.
Excellent.
A blue-green staff. So that's not entirely new, but it's something that doesn't happen all too often. And I think we'll realize the benefits of that going down the road.
Sir, was that innovation on the fly, or is that something you had planned?
No, that's something that General Osterman and the Commander 3rd Fleet kind of worked out on their own.
That's fantastic.
But, we've been looking at naval integration, and it's more than just trading people on staffs. It's how do we actually operate in a naval campaign to leverage each other's capabilities. In the past, I think it's been too easy for us to be compartmentalized, and I think now we realize we got to be, the more and more we're in the same space, on the same comms, the better we're going to be and the more effective we're going to be.
So I'd like to riff on this question a little bit more here. So what are some of the challenges to modernizing the Marine Corps over the next 10 years? And more specifically, why is change so difficult throughout our forces? You've enjoyed a fair share amount of critique and criticism for some of the recommended changes you've made. Is that just a natural derivative of modernization?
I think it's just a natural inclination of people that when you tell them you're going to change, they mistakenly interpret that what they've done was not good. And it has nothing to do with that. It has to do, no, what you did was good. It's just not going to, we just don't think it's going to meet what we look forward to. And you can say, well, you can argue about with the scenario, and you say, what's going to happen in 2030? I mean, there's a really good article in the media today, I can't remember the forum, but from Peter Singer about the 3 things going to happen and how do you do the different types of warfare. And I always read everything he writes because I think he's a really smart guy. And I don't know if he's here or not, but
yes, sir.
I should get a commission on all the books I've helped him sell. But I think actually we are going to do a Marine Corps Cyber Auxiliary, by the way, just for the record.
Peter's
if
right.
anybody wants to join, you can sign up. You can be our first member. You get a T-shirt. You can have purple hair too. But no EGA. But I think it's just a natural order of things. So, but I think as time goes on, and I think as you expose people to things, I mean, a lot of times it's just you don't know what you don't know. I think for me, I went to Singularity University in January of 2015, and I was in a room with a bunch of biochemists and venture capitalists and cyber people, and they were from all over the world. I mean, I was like a Klingon captured by the Federation. And but I sat there for 5 days, and all these very experienced, knowledgeable scientists and subject matter experts came in and talked about energy and biomechanics and additive manufacturing and artificial intelligence and energy. And you just sit there and you go like, wow, I had no idea. So, you have to kind of open up your mind a little bit. But at the same time, there are certain parts of this, as you know. I mean, you still got to have good people. You still got to train hard. You still have to be disciplined. At some point in the fight, there may be a time where somebody's going to stand on a piece of ground with a weapon in their hand and say, this is mine, you can't have it. But we'll see how that all plays out. But you got to get to that point. And to get to that point, you got to be able to control your network, deny them theirs, and manage your comms, and be able to deliver your fires accurately in timely manner, which means you have some access to space, and hopefully they don't. So I think we're training that, and it's happening.
Excellent. So let's dig a little deeper and specifically look at future employment of the force, the Corps itself. Knowing the deeply constrained physical environment, perhaps specifically in Europe, but certainly beyond, how will we ensure that allies and partners keep pace with our emphasis on emergent technologies? How do we ensure that our allies and partners retain enough technical capability to provide certain like-for-like functional capabilities and not be relegated to niche capability contributions in a coalition warfare context?
Well, I'm not sure you could say the last 2 years when we've had the highest budgetary levels that we've had a fiscally constrained environment. I mean, we'll try to do the best and spend that money. Now, previous to that, you could make that point, and we're hopeful this year that the Congress will be able to figure out that they're willing, that a way to at least maintain a certain level of sustained, reliable funding, because that's really what's changing our readiness. But with our partners, I think there's a recognition on both sides of what they can and cannot do, and I think that's fine. I think we have to be more open to what they can do and focus less on the other. And I think there's a lot of great capability amongst our allies. I won't name them, but I mean, whether they're in the NATO alliance or in other parts of the world. And I think we'll figure out a way, to pass information and communicate. And I think part of that's on us. I think we need to be more flexible with our policies. I'm not sure we'll ever get away at certain levels of classification when we don't have parallel networks. But I think where those networks touch and where we can pass information, I think both sides have to be a little more flexible in doing that. So today the Commandant General of the Royal Marines is visiting here. We've done a lot of work with the Royal Marines, particularly in the European theater. They've helped us in Norway with our cold weather training, and there's going to be other deployments where they're going to take advantage of their aircraft carrier, the Queen Elizabeth, and we'll try to support that effort. So we'll work through that. But I know people are worried about somebody's going to get too far ahead and the other. Most of the time, the uniformed people can figure out a way to do that, but you got to bake that in. And I mean, as much concern is that even within the Joint Force, that we have as much interoperability and we have commonality, and then we have to share that so that people can get on a common ground, because we have to be able to communicate. So it's a constant struggle, but I think everybody's a recognition, and I think we're moving toward that to try to make it better.
So let's shift a little bit towards technological nuts and bolts and to the challenges and opportunities of modernizing the Corps. First, I've got a couple of questions in this regard. First, how is new technology shaping how the Marine Corps operates? How do you envision the Marine Corps working with the established market to enhance its technology?
Well, I think communications is probably the first area where we're trying to take advantage of what's out there, whether it's tablets or different pieces of hardware and software that allow us to do things faster and better. The ability we have to buy straight from the market, though, is somewhat, there is some friction there based on the rules and regulations that we have to do for acquisition. But I think we make our best level effort to do that. I'm not sure. I know that artificial intelligence and things like that, obviously autonomy, robotics, manned, unmanned, that's all happening, whether it be ground vehicles or air vehicles or unmanned aircraft. Pretty much every ground vehicle you have can be driven and operated autonomously. Right. I mean, the other day they ran an amphibious assault vehicle up and down the beach, driven by somebody with a controller. And that sounds great until it throws track, and then the robot can't put the track back on, and the robot can't do security. Right. And then I'm going to ask you if you're going to put your son or daughter in the back of that thing without a human being driving that thing. So there's issues with that. But I think unmanned aircraft, unmanned ships, I know this CNO's got a considerable effort there. Unmanned undersea vehicles, ability to put, you talk about swarming drones in the air, you can put swarming drones in the water to go find things and find a precision location on them, and then if you wanted to potentially remove them. So the autonomy, the robotics, I think that's going to be a player as long as we can figure out how to scale it and get the price down. Additive manufacturing is a big deal for us as an expeditionary force, because if you can make it and you don't have to bring it with you, and you completely untether yourself from the supply chain. So we own about 180 3D printers, 3 of them printing metal. My goal, if I were to stick around, and I'll pass this on to my successor, I think every Marine Maintenance Battalion, of which there are 3, and every Marine Air Logistics Squadron, of which there are 3, actually there's more than 3, there's probably about 10, they all need to be printing in metal in less than 5 years. Because the people that are selling the stuff we're buying, when I talk to them, they're telling me they're printing this stuff. And my question to them is, well, if you're printing it and I can print it, why am I paying you to do what I can do? Right. I'll pay you for the technical data package, which is fair. It'd be kind of like buying music from Apple. I'll pay for the tech data package for the part. And so we've got approval. We've probably a couple hundred parts, and most of it in polymers and plastics, some in metal that we've got approval. and we actually use it. And I think as you scale that, that's going to both make your readiness go up, get parts faster, and it's going to save you a lot of money. So autonomy, robotics, manned, unmanned, aircraft, vehicles, printing. There's a lot of stuff going on in the medical field. As far as analytics for large amounts of data for planning or petting information, or huge amounts of data that are going to be collected by unmanned aircraft or manned aircraft like the F-35. We're going to need to have an algorithm that's going to look through all that stuff to quickly find it. Otherwise, we'll be buried in this stuff. So this is all happening. The Secretary of Defense, the prior and the current, have got a lot of activities going on. Dr. Griffin's got a lot of money for long-range precision fires, for hypervelocity weapons, for directed energy, for lasers. All this is happening, and we're testing, and we'll get there because we got to go fast.
So you mentioned the 180 3D printers and the fact you're producing over 100, I think around 125 ground and 83 aviation parts. You kind of stole my question on that one. I'm very intrigued at how that changes the whole calculation of how we think about or have thought about traditionally about readiness, and really in terms of versus, for the most part, a ready for force versus a force forward deployed and ready to fight tonight. It seems like this capability allows us to finally break out of that versus, that supply versus demand, that whole notion of having the cycle all the way back to home station, terra firma here in the United States for quote-unquote readiness, and moves us more towards, I think, what the chairman's even talked about in terms of combined joint readiness, a continuum of readiness. I just wondered what you thought about that.
Well, I think it's kind of intuitively obvious. If I can make it, I don't have to put in the requisition.
Right.
I don't have to wait for it to get sent back. I don't have to wait for the DHL flight if they can get there to arrive. Or if I'm at sea in the middle of the ocean and I can print a part for whatever, I don't have to wait weeks and weeks and weeks. And there's still stuff we have that's legacy, and there may not be a vendor for it. The people that did that stuff may have gone out of business, but we can still scan it and then and make the part. So the ground vehicles are easier because if you make something out of metal and it breaks, the vehicle just stops. So if you make something for an airplane and it breaks, falling out of the sky is really not an acceptable option. So there's got to be a metallurgy, and there's got to be a quality control, and there's got to be a certain skill level there. But we'll continue to work that. So what we found is most successful is get a bunch of young Marines. There's a maker's lab that we have, and there's a group of people that help train them, and they kind of open their eyes to this stuff, and then they start thinking about, well, I can make this, I can make this. So for me, the aha moment was, and this is really kind of small, but I think it speaks to the potential. So it was a wet, rainy afternoon in November a couple of years ago, and we were on our way home, and they go, hey, we're going to stop at the logistics squadron, the aviation logistics squadron, and it's Friday, and I said, the Marines, they've been waiting. Okay, so we'll go see them. So I walk in this big kind of van, shipping container van, because expeditionary shelter, and there's this Lance Corporal there, and he's showing me that he had printed a switch, a knob for an intercom. So I'm like, so what's the big deal? I mean, great job, Marine. So he says, but what he said was, so you don't understand is that, so the unit of issue, I can't buy this knob. I have to buy the whole plate for the ICX box, and that plate and all that stuff cost me $11,000. I printed this for 2.5 cents. I said, make a whole bag of them. He says, but I don't have authority to put the knob on. I said, you are granted my authority as the Commandant of the Marine Corps to put this knob on that switch, on that intercom box. And so, I mean, we've gone back through the naval bureaucracy, naval air, and said, hey, look, and so you got to go, there's a process, but now that process is there, and said, so there's, hey, we want to print this. Marines, hey, can we print this? Can we print this? We want to print this. We want to make this tool here, we can print this. So like, whoa. I said, no, I told them to go do this. So now we have to create the process to where you acknowledge it and you approve it. And so I think it's just going to go. I mean, that's how many we've gotten done. That doesn't say how many are waiting.
Right.
But the metal, printing in plastic and polymers, I mean, there's a lot of stuff we make. I mean, I could give you other examples where rather than wait for something simple, we just print it and we just put it on, and it's good enough. It works. And if it breaks, okay, there's a bag of them, put another one on.
Yeah.
But
where's the bag now, sir?
I don't know. It's probably hanging inside that airplane, I hope. But the metal thing is really, when you start to print in steel, aluminum, titanium, and other composites, that's when it'll really start to take off.
I'm haunted again by my earlier question, and a conversation that's really been a common thread throughout all the panels today. And this is this question of whether or not, what about allies, what about partners, whether we are at risk of unintendedly outpacing allies and partners, particularly with this kind of technology where we can do this within ourselves on the fly. Concerns, any kind of concerns?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
allies and partners along?
No, but I think particularly, I mean, for the additive manufacturing, not at all, because I think in many cases, many of our partners are ahead of us. And the machines that do this, we're buying them from them.
Excellent.
So they're aware of this, and they're knowledgeable of this. I think the big thing is probably the command and control and being able to access space and the network and all that, and being able to be, particularly in a classified domain, because that's where those things, as you know, they start to rub against each other, and people get concerned that stuff is going to leak over, and then they allow you to get in. Not from them, but from anybody. Mm-hmm. So the security of the network is a big deal. And so we need to be witting to that, because to me that's where the fight is going to begin, and it could end right there.
So I'm going to ask you one more question, and we'll open it up to the living room.
Okay.
Conversation. And my final question for you, sir, is just let me ask you one more question. It's this. As you continue to identify, assess, recruit, and train Marines, do you foresee any challenges or necessary changes given the differences in various generations? Will Marines in the future be the same as Marines today?
I've actually had young Marines ask me this question, because I think they sense that, obviously they're digital natives, and they grew up in a different way. They never grew up not knowing what a cell phone was. They never grew up the way I grew up, and probably you grew up, where you had little and expected less, and you made do and you figured it out. I mean, they're very adaptive, they're smart, but I think it's, we look at each generation and try to figure out what kind of makes them do what they do. But at the end of the day, I think it's the same for the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, or the Coast Guard. I mean, there are young men and women out there, virtue and character, they want to serve, and it's up to us to bring them in, teach them if we need to teach them, or reinforce the values and culture they already have, make sure they understand this is not about them, it's about the team, and that they're not here to make a lot of money, they're here to serve, and they're here to execute orders to the best of their ability, and that they have to be disciplined, focused, and selfless, and they're going to constantly be asked to deny themselves. They're going to have to deny themselves. They're going to have to forego what their normal, natural inclination is to do something for themselves, to do what's right for the good of the group and good of the unit. And I don't think that's impossible. I have great confidence. I mean, everybody's worries about, you read the history, what about the next generation? And they're not going, and they always seem to must step up and do their job. So at the same time, I think it's up to us that we have to set the right example, and we have to model our behavior. We have to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk, and hold ourselves accountable along with them. And if we do that, I think we'll be fine.
Hoorah, sir. Let's open it up.
Just for the record, the soldier said hoorah. So
I did, sir.
Hoorah.
I had to practice that for
that was very well done.
Today.
It's like you get your foreign language credit for that.
That's it. But not the extra pay.
No pay. We don't need more people that speak Marine.
Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Commandant. Thank you so much for coming. It was a fascinating conversation. So I'm the designated Game of Thrones fan in this audience.
I was really disappointed last night.
Were you?
I was.
Why?
There's a lot of, Jon Snow and the Khaleesi flying around in the dark in a dragon. I mean, like, do something,
All right.
Big spoiler alert going on right now.
Look, this is the last.
And another example, if your weather's bad, air support could be a problem.
That's the line of the day. But on a more serious note, although it may not sound it, Arya Stark is one of the top warriors of the Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. And she's absolutely awesome. And I wonder to what extent seeing women like that as warriors, absolutely as warriors, skilled and powerful, to what extent that changes the ability to recruit women and to engage with women in a core of true warriors.
Well, I'm really proud of the women that not just serve in the U.S. military, but particularly those that serve in the Marine Corps. And we've increased the number of women in the last few years by about 1,600. Not to the degree that I wanted to, because we're trying to find talent, whoever they might be, the most talented men and women that want to serve. So when we went through the process of integration of all units and MOSs, we knew there would be a phase-in period, and so it's been pretty slow, but the numbers are there. But at the end of the day, it's all about standards. So, I think most people know what they're good at and what they want to do, and if that's what interests you, to be in a close combat or a ground combat unit, and you meet the standard, then you'll be given that opportunity to compete and do that job. So, as I travel around and see Marines, I'm always impressed by all Marines and what they're able to do, and their physicality and their motivation and their drive. So to me, that issue is not something I spend a lot of time on every day. I'm going to make sure that every Marine's put in the position in the organization where they can contribute the most effectively and where they feel that their talents are being used in the best way. And if they meet the standard, then they get the job, full stop.
Sir, please.
Evening, General. Otto Kreischer, Sea Power Magazine. You have made what they mentioned the tough decisions on changing the rifle squad, but you have some even more difficult decisions in reducing your infantry, your 03 grunts, in order to put your manpower into other things, cyber, special ops, communications, those kind of things. How's that going? Are you getting the people you need in those skills, and are you seeing any kickback from the grunts on downsizing your infantry battalions?
No, the infantry are the most understanding group in the Marine Corps, so they're fully on board. I'm sure we still talk about this. But to the real point of the question is, we did not know at the time what our end strength was going to be, and we felt that it was critically important that we create these other capabilities, whether it be increased intelligence analysis, whether it be increased electronic warfare, whether it was increased cyber capability, whether it was increased information operations and how you're going to leverage the information domain, and there were some other things. So it was a difficult decision to make, but I think now looking back at it, I think it was the right one. We'll see in the next 10 years, because I think we've seen that the battle goes on every day in the information domain, many of you are involved in that contest. So we're always managing risk. We continue to have discussions about, do we have too much of this and not enough of this? You're always hedging your bets. So do we have too much, too many vehicles? Do we need this much lift? Are our vehicles too heavy? Can we get them on ship? How are we going to get them to the fight? So we're always in that kind of give and take. In fact, we had another discussion today about it. So it'll never end. And I think as we look at our potential adversaries and see the capabilities that they're building, I think we got to look at that. Because if you don't pay attention to what your adversaries are doing and and you don't learn from them, then you're not going to be a good position if and when you have to compete with them. And we compete with them every day.
Gentleman in the back here, please.
Thank you. Sir, at the beginning of your remarks, you mentioned how the Marines generally are a Pacific-oriented looking branch. How do you describe the Pacific challenge today as opposed to World War II, when the Marines sort of made their reputation in the minds of many Americans of that generation? Obviously, China's a rising power and Japan's not the adversary any longer, but distances are the same. How would you assess the differences that you're looking at, please? Thank you.
I mean, the geography is geography. You can change geography, but in the Pacific, I mean, the fact you've had these huge distances and the geography is very similar to what the nation faced in 1941, and even some of the places where the Chinese are trying to influence things with One Belt, One Road and the network and all this stuff. I mean, it's a very effective strategy where they have operationalized capital to come in and try to influence governments that give them a geopolitical position. So it won't be the same. It's not the same, but if you look at the ground and the distances out there, there are some comparisons. So I think we're competing out there in that area. I mean, the Marine Corps laydown at the beginning of World War II, the Marine Corps was probably under 50,000. I don't know the exact number. At the end of World War II, we were 400,000, 6 divisions and 5 air wings, and then after the war went down to about 80,000, and then the strength came back up for Korea, and I can show you this. So the laydown that we came up with, just about 2/3 of the operational Marine Corps is in the Pacific, working for the commander of Indo-PACOM. So that's where the force is. It doesn't mean that's where we have to employ ourselves, but the strategy tells us that's where our focus should be. So we're watching what's going on in all the different places, not just in the Pacific, but throughout the world. And you can look at there are certain geographical choke points. If the mission of the Navy is to control sea lines of communication, to facilitate commerce and the safe passage of energy and other things. So I think you can kind of figure out where the key points are, and I think the Navy and the Marine Corps are trying to position themselves to where if we had to control those areas or any other area, that we'd have the wherewithal to do that, which is what our mission is. Seize and secure advanced naval bases in the prosecution of a naval campaign, conduct sustained land operations ashore in support of that campaign.
That's how you say it. Sir. Right here in the middle. Just wait for the mic, please. Thanks.
How do you help facilitate the coming home of Marines in light of the crisis with suicide?
That's a difficult question. So I think at the beginning of OIF, we realized that we didn't really have a plan. And we anticipated a lot because what we learned from other armies, like particularly the Israeli army, that there had to be a way to bring warriors back or people back who had seen the horrors of combat or had just been through that trauma. And we came up with a program, and it was part of a transition, and we tried to track those people. And then when you saw other people that we came home with wounds, physical wounds that we could see, and then later on wounds we couldn't see, we created a Wounded Warrior Regiment to try to take care of those Marines, follow up on their care, and make sure that they had a lifeline or somebody to call. So fortunately, until a couple of weeks ago, we hadn't had a Marine die in combat since 2016. Staff Sergeant Carden was killed in northern Iraq, and then we had the 3 Marines killed in Afghanistan a couple of weeks ago. And you saw, I think most people saw the funeral of Staff Sergeant Slutman up in New York City. He'll be buried at Arlington tomorrow. The suicide that we're having now is very different. And I mean, I'll put the veteran suicide over here on the side. But last year we had the highest number of Marines take their own lives was 58 in the active force and another 18 in the reserve force. And the great majority of those Marines have never deployed. That doesn't mean they didn't have trauma, they didn't have something in their lives. And so we're trying to figure out where we now, you're never going to have enough mental health capability, but we have probably the greatest amount of mental health capability we've ever had. We've set up, tried to train the force to be aware of this, try to encourage people to seek help, try to make people understand, what's going on, but we're still having a hard time. And so I'm of all the stuff that's happened since I've been in this office, that's probably one of the ones that's the most frustrating to me. Because, and again, I can profile it, I can give you reasons, I can explain it to you, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still an issue. So we'll continue to work on it. But if there were a specific answer, then the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps would have found it. We would have implemented it.
Sir, and then.
Sir, good afternoon. George Nicholson of the Special Operations Forces Foundation. A little over a year ago, you were the Atlantic Council, and you stood up and you said the biggest threat the Marines face in the future is the dependence upon GPS and SATCOM. And you alluded that you had been in Afghanistan the month before and asked one of the Marines you were driving around with to show you something on the map. And they said, we don't use maps anymore. We've got smartphones and we've got tablets. There was an earlier panel here on what the U.S. military will be doing in space in 2030. What's your comfort level about what's being done to solve your concern and question?
Well, first of all, if you went to the field and saw a Marine unit, and if they didn't have a map in their pocket, I'd be pretty upset. Because we're operating and training, at least our major exercises, on the assumption that the network is likely not going to be there, or it's going to be intermittent, or worse, it's not reliable. In other words, what you see is not true. That's, to me, the biggest threat. It's up, it looks normal, but it's off. And so I think there is a space command, it's part of STRATCOM now, to emphasize this, to understand the priority of space as the ultimate high ground. I think that's a good idea. I think we need to be more active in being able to protect the satellites and put a new constellation up there and quickly establish more communication satellites if they're lost for whatever reason. But I think everybody realizes that this is the number one issue for the Department of Defense, is a reliable, resilient, recoverable network. And we all accept the fact that it's not going to be there 100% like it's been the last 17 years, because there's been nobody to contest it. There will be in the future. At the same time, if you lose a network, you can't just stop and throw your hands up. You've got other means to communicate. You've got other means to navigate. And there's other ways to deliver a precision munition other than with GPS, or to find your way, or to drive, or get your timing. And if we got to go to HF radio and paper maps and yellow stickies and messengers and landline and wire, then we'll do that if we have to. But hopefully, if we have to do that, we've done the same thing to the other guy, and in the adversary, we're fighting on a level playing field. But to me, that's going to be the first salvo of whatever competition there is. I mean, that goes on. I'm not going to speak for General Nakasone, but if he were here, or any of his folks, he'd tell you that fight's going on every day, every second right now.
One more question, ma'am.
General, I'm Sharon Burke from New America, and trying to figure out the right way to ask this question. You mentioned China's Belt and Road Initiative and their geopolitical positioning, and that it's a successful strategy. The National Defense Strategy is really focused on lethality and on great power competition. And where does the Marine Corps and the Department of Defense fit in our overall strategy? And I say this advisedly with, down the hall from us where we're sitting right now is the Agency for International Development, which is losing people and consumed in a reorganization. State Department's in the same kind of condition. Where what's our strategy? How does the Marine Corps fit into a broader strategy with the focus on lethality these days?
Well, remember, the strategy has three parts. The first is increase lethality and readiness of the force. The second one is build and maintain alliances and partnerships. And you can't do that unless you're out there with your partners, building new partners, maintaining the alliances and partnerships you have, and you have to do that by being physically present. And obviously, the interagency piece is part of that. But for the military, for the naval force, we see ourselves, and the strategy talks about the contact force, which is out forward deployed, postured. And so we're out there every day training with our allies, moving through the battle space. The adversary sees us. We're out there competing with them below the level of conflict, trying to ensure that our allies understand we're going to be there, they can trust us, we're reliable. And the economic piece is something that we work with the embassy on. So it's not just, it can't just be the M and dime, it's got to be the diplomacy, the information, the economy. So we're all about increasing the capability of whether it's USAID or people doing Peace Corps or anything else out in the area. But at the same time, we may be able to create an entry point there or go there along with other American agencies. So in the South Pacific, for example, throughout Oceania, Micronesia, all those islands, we probably could use a little more coverage, a little more help. But we're out there, Admiral Davidson's out there working to try to get us into all these places we haven't been, because we know that others are going to go there and they're going to try to influence the action. And we can't just rely on our goodwill and the fact that people probably would like to work with us more than others if you don't have something to provide them, whether it be rebuild the school, fix the power grid, pave the road, increase the depth of the port, improve the airport, whatever it is. You got to do something. And I think there's clearly a recognition within the department, and I think within the government, that that's where we need to go. And not just our government. I think it's with our partners throughout the Pacific and throughout NATO and other places in Africa. We can't be everywhere, so we have to be very specific on where we go and focus on those places where are critically important to us. But at some point, you mentioned the Chinese. They are expanding, and at some point, though, if you get too big, you potentially could create your own vulnerabilities. But we'll see what happens. But I'm confident that there's a recognition within the government that that's where we need to go. And then just like, I don't think anybody in the military wants to see a reduction in any of what you would call soft power things, because that's really what at the end of the day is going to help keep us from going to war, which is our ultimate goal.
And so with that, we are out of time. Please, everyone, join me in thanking the Commandant. Thanks for your service, sir. Appreciate it.